If you grew up in the 90s and watched Saturday morning cartoons like I did, you're probably familiar with Static Shock. The animated series featured a theme song by Little Romeo,
Looking good, Romeo.
a who's who of guest voice talent, and perhaps most notably, the first black superhero to lead his own TV show. Now, our hero Static has more than a little bit in common with someone you've probably never heard of. Today we're talking about the forgotten creator of Static Shock. So history has proven Static Shock to be a groundbreaking animated series. The first of its kind won a Humanitas Award and at one point was going toe-to-toe with Pokemon for the highest rated program at Kids WB. But what many don't know is that Static Shock doesn't have its roots in a TV show pitch. It actually started out as a comic book from the most successful black publisher in history, Milestone Media. Now, as the story goes, the original idea for Milestone Media was conceived in 1990 at San Diego Comic-Con. Comic book artist Dennis Cowan really wanted to create a universe of black superheroes orchestrated by a who's who of talented black writers and artists. He called his friend Michael Davis to run the idea by him, and he was in. Now, the comics wouldn't write themselves, so they called on Dwayne McDuffie, and to handle business affairs, Dennis called on childhood friend Derek Dingle, who'd grown up to become an executive at Black Enterprise. Over the course of a few months, they created an entire universe of characters. They called it the Dakota Universe. Eventually, they brought their completed series Bible to DC Comics and struck a legendary partnership, and the rest is history. Now, we know a lot about Dwayne McDuffie's role as he wrote the majority of Milestone's initial titles, and he served as editor-in-chief. Derek Dingle handled day-to-day operations as CEO, and Dennis Cowan was the creative director who handled all the character designs. But who is Michael Davis, and what exactly did he do? Michael Davis grew up in New York City and graduated from the Manhattan High School of Art and Design, then studied fine arts at Pratt Institute. By the mid-'80s, he developed quite the lucrative career as a corporate illustrator, and though illustration paid really well, Davis really wanted to make a name for himself in comics. While his comic book credits pre-Milestone are sparse, he was chosen to pencil ETC, the book that launched DC's Piranha Press line, as well as several issues during Mike Grell's Longbow Hunter saga starring Green Arrow. What's been well documented is the fact that Michael Davis always used his opportunities to give back. He even taught free cartooning classes for children in Harlem. In 1987, he started the Bad Boy Studios mentorship program that turned out such esteemed artists as Bernard Chang, Sean Martinborough, Jean-Paul Leon, and even Boondocks creator Aaron McGruder. But what hasn't been documented as well is what Michael's role as co-founder of Milestone fully entailed. According to Michael Davis, the Dakota Universe Bible came together over the course of nearly a year, with each co-founder contributing portions of each character's backstory. Each founder had a pet project, and Michael's was Static. He created the world around Static, including naming all of the supporting characters. Initially, he was going to be the artist on the series as well. When he decided to pass those art duties on to his mentee Jean-Paul Leon, he was left without a book to steward. He was supposed to make up for this with a graphic novel featuring Static and Rocket, but that project never left the ground. Once the company was officially incorporated, Michael Davis says he was responsible for all of Milestone's external marketing efforts, including setting up convention appearances, PR, and other partnerships. He was also in charge of finding and managing new talent. In fact, many of Milestone's first artists were alumni of Davis's Bad Boy Studios mentorship program. According to court filings, Michael Davis officially relinquished his shares of the Milestone Media Company in April of 1994. That's 1 year after the first comics were published and about 4 years into the total history of the company. While the exact reason for Mr. Davis's departure has never been stated publicly, it's not hard to infer. A clause in Milestone's Articles of Incorporation prevented any of the 4 owners from drawing a salary in the first 7 years. Instead, the founders all agreed that they would be given page rates for any books they contributed to in that period. Since Michael Davis wasn't writing or drawing anything, that means he wasn't being paid for any work he did at Milestone. After leaving, Davis became the CEO of Motown Animation and Filmworks, where he teamed up with Image Comics to publish the Motown Machine Works comic imprint. He went on to help launch the Guardian line of comics for Urban Ministries and the Action Files for Pearson Learning. Over the years, and especially since the passing of Dwayne McDuffie in 2011, several fan retellings and unofficial documentaries have gotten certain details about Milestone's early years wrong. Namely, the creation of Static is often only attributed to the three names on 1993's debut issue: Dwayne McDuffie, Robert Washington III, and John Paul Leon. One video even claims that Dwayne McDuffie came up with the idea for Milestone while he was still writing for Marvel Comics in the 80s, omitting the contributions of the other founders entirely. If you add this to the fact that Michael Davis didn't get to participate in Milestone's relaunch 20 years later, it's easy to see why he has a problem with the way the story's been told over the years. There's no official record of exactly who did what at Milestone, but bits and pieces of the story have come out over the years. In the first trade paperback for Static, Trial by Fire, Dwayne McDuffie acknowledged that it was Michael Davis who recommended John Paul Leon to be the series artist. In Robert Kirkman's Secret History of Comics, Dennis Cowan says that while he drew all the characters, Michael Davis and others wrote parts of the Dakota Universe Bible. But perhaps the best piece of evidence is this video that I teased earlier.
I will give you a bit of information. Static's family. Static's mother's name is Jean and his father's name is Robert. And it just so happens that my mother's name is Jean and my father's name is Robert. And Static has a sister named Sharon. It just so happens that I have a sister named Sharon. But I haven't the slightest idea how that happened.
That's Michael Davis at Philadelphia Comic Fest 1993. Dwayne McDuffie was also present and interviewed for the same feature, and while I don't think he would have disputed anything in front of a camera in the middle of a busy comic convention, as outspoken as we learned Dwayne McDuffie to be, both in his editorials and in subsequent message boards online, if there was a part of the narrative that needed to be restated, he would have restated it, in my opinion. And speaking of Dwayne McDuffie correcting the narrative, remember when I said there were only 4 co-founders of Milestone Media? Well, turns out I wasn't telling you the truth. In its earliest days, Milestone actually had a 5th co-founder. Writer and editor James Owsley, now known as Christopher Priest, was the first black man editor in mainstream comics and was originally tapped to be Milestone's first editor-in-chief. When he left the company for personal reasons right before the DC deal was signed, he relinquished all rights to anything he created in the Dakota universe, and apparently the right to be credited for anything at all. It wasn't until years later that Dwayne McDuffie acknowledged Priest's contributions to the company on his personal blog. And in a response on his own blog, Priest took credit for Milestone's logo, naming Dakota City and several of its landmarks, the basic premise of Icon and Rocket, the name Static, and the names of several members of the Blood Syndicate. Just reading that, it's kind of crazy to think that all of that went uncredited during the entire time that Milestone was initially publishing. But in subsequent interviews, the remaining Milestone founders have always acknowledged Priest's contributions, and if Milestone could do right by Priest, then there's certainly hope that Mr. Davis could get his just due as well. So 2023 marks 30 years since Milestone Comics first hit shelves, and this video started as like an unabridged fan history of that company, from the inception in 1990 until the publishing initially stopped in 1997. And as I was doing research to put together the super nerdy Milestone fan doc, I couldn't ignore just how vocal Michael Davis has been in recent years about the fact that he feels overlooked as a co-creator of Static. And so I thought, all right, well, let me investigate and see what I can prove is true and what I can say there's question marks about, so we can just definitively put this argument to bed one way or the other. I can't lie, I was surprised at how easily I was able to prove most of Michael Davis's claims, and even the claims that I couldn't straight up prove, I found a lot of evidence that pointed to it being true. So I have no reason not to believe anything he said over the years. But what I also found was that no one at Milestone had ever really disputed it. At least none of the co-founders have. Even the instances that I could find on the record where someone disputed how involved Michael Davis was, it was typically a fan recounting stories that they've heard somewhere, or just not crossing their I's, dotting their T's, right? Just easily just looking at issue 1 and saying, oh, the people on the first issue must be the ones that created the character. Like, honestly, they seem like honest mistakes. Michael Davis has alluded to like people being bad actors and having a sort of vendetta out against him. I don't know. I wasn't there for any of that stuff. And again, I'm just a fan. I don't have any insider information. But again, it was interesting to see how easily I could prove his claims. And it also was telling to me that none of the Milestone co-founders ever really disputed it. In fact, there's a lot of evidence that they were right there and supported his claims the whole time as well. The problem, though, is that they never went on record to back him up. And so it does seem like there's a lot of times where Michael Davis is kind of like screaming into the wind and no one's listening. And, when you ignore someone enough, it makes them look, crazy and, for lack of a better term. But with all that said, this video quickly turned from like a sort of investigation into like a really awesome retrospective on what Michael Davis's career has been. While I had read like sort of footnotes and bits and pieces of where he ended up throughout his journeys in comics, I had never just laid it all out and actually investigated it. And when you do, you find that there's character names that are the same. Like, there's all these different through lines, whether it's artists and writers, people that he gave opportunities to. You can see them from Milestone to Image and Motown to the Guardian line for Urban Ministries. You see it everywhere that Michael Davis has been. There's these footsteps that you can clearly see people following. And so that was really cool to see. And as I, put this video together, as I was researching and writing, I started to understand the gripe. And I think for you to better understand it, right, think about where or what you know about the other Milestone co-founders. We know that Dwayne McDuffie is like a legend, a GOAT, because he was able to basically ride out the Milestone wave until it ended, and also have a second storied career for himself in animation. So by the time he passed, everyone knew how great he was. With Dennis Cowan was a great artist and cartoonist before Milestone, long before Milestone, and he continued to do great work in comics after. And Derek Dingle was always a businessman, and he kept being a businessman after Milestone ended as well. The only person who didn't really get to sort of ride off into the sunset was Michael Davis. While he did have other comic book opportunities, they were not in the traditional comic book industry. And he has his own stories as to why he believes that is. That's not something I can speak to, because that's honestly not something I could verify. But because Michael Davis didn't get to have that sort of recognizable career in comics the way his contemporaries did, the people that he was studio mates with and knew well, like Walt Simonson, Neil Adams, Dennis Cowan, Howard Chaykin, like it's like the names of all the names, Bill Sienkiewicz, the people that Michael Davis counts as contemporaries, like we know them, but we largely don't know him. And so I could see why, as you get into your later years, you're like, all right, I need to get my props for this one thing I contributed to the culture that everyone knows, even if they don't know anything else that I did. And so with that, I guess I've answered the question, why has Michael Davis been fighting for this for so long? And like I said, to everyone else at Milestone's credit, no one's disputed it. In fact, Dennis Cowan actually made a statement in 2015 to press saying like, hey, his name is in the credits just like our names are in the credits. And so I could see, like, if you're in a band and you made the greatest song in the world, And now people want to say, well, actually, I came up with the melody and I did the drumming, and this person did this and this person did that. You don't want to feel like your contribution is being diminished. And so I get it. And then also, Dwayne McDuffie, John Paul Leon, Robert Washington III are all dead and gone. And so you don't want to be seen as sort of stepping on their graves by trying to claim credit for something that you've done. So I get it. Everybody's stuck between a rock and a hard place. But for me as a fan, kind of seeing the disputes and the conflict online, it just sort of feels like, I don't know, your uncle's fighting at the family reunion. And you're just like, hey, can we just be a happy family? I don't know. But anyway, this isn't about conflict. I really enjoyed making this video because if I hadn't made this video, I wouldn't have been able to connect all the dots and order some of the comics that Michael Davis had been instrumental in, and get to learn all these other stories and these world building that he's done. Michael Davis was an executive producer of comics. That's probably the best word I could find to describe what he's done. He's definitely built worlds and been creative, even though he hasn't written or drawn many comics at all. When you look at the different characters and all the stories and universes that he's built, he reuses their names, he reuses certain backstories. Like, he puts his touch on everything that he has a hand in, even if he doesn't put his name on it. And that's honestly pretty admirable as a creative. So anyway, thank you guys for watching this video essay. This was my first one. It was kind of rough. Hopefully you enjoyed it. And if you want to help me out with the next one, please click the join button down below. The channel family is who made this video possible. And listen, I know why the big dogs in the video essay world do like one video a month, because this is crazy. It's stressful. But I appreciate you guys watching. I hope you guys enjoyed my research as much as I enjoyed putting it together. And let me know what you want me to do another essay on in the comments down below. I'll see you guys in another video soon. Until then, I don't know what you're doing. I don't know what you're reading, but hopefully it's something dope. Peace.